quite some threat intelligence, threat research communities, and he's also one of the members of the Enviso CSIRT. So thank you so much, Didier, for coming here to spend time with us and to do this presentation. Just really quick, if somebody has any questions, use the event questions channel to ask them, and at the end, I will take those questions and I'll ask them to Didier during the Q&A session. So I'll hand it over to you, Didier.
Okay, thank you, Alexander, for the introduction. So today I'm going to speak about the Cobalt strike research that we did at Enviso. And right from the start, let me say that this is from a blue team perspective, okay, not from a red team perspective. So I am Didier Stevens, and you have a picture there of me, and it's a quite recent picture. So I'm telling you that because I cannot turn on my camera, as you have understood. If I turn on my camera, which I usually do, yeah, then we will be limited to 25. So, as Alexander said, I work in the CSIRT team of Enviso, and I do their incident response and malware analysis. I'm also a handler at the SANS Internet Storm Center, so I regularly write diary entries on the Storm Center, often about malware and recently also about Cobalt strike. Now, I want to point out that my work here on Cobalt strike is a work in progress. So the tools and the techniques are still evolving while I'm researching and learning how all this stuff work. And with all this stuff, that's what I'm going to explain now, what we can do when it comes to incidents with Cobalt strike. So the agenda, an intro on Cobalt strike, should you not be familiar with Cobalt strike, then a subject on beacon analysis, and I will explain what beacons are, if you are not familiar with the beacon term, network traffic analysis, and then Q&A. And as Alexander said, I will take questions at the end, so post them in the channel, and then Alexander will read them to me at the end. So let's start with the intro, with the Cobalt strike. So this is a screenshot that I took from the website of Cobalt strike. So as you can see here, it's a software for adversary simulation and red team operations. So it is software that gives you remote access to machines. It doesn't exploit any vulnerabilities. It's not like Metasploit, that you can exploit a certain number of vulnerabilities on a target and then deploy MeterPreter to that target so that you can get control over it. Now, that is not what Cobalt strike does. Cobalt strike doesn't use exploits. You have to find a way to deploy the agent on the target, and then you will have control over that target. What differentiates it from a normal remote access tool is that the features and functionality in Cobalt strike is specific for what red team needs, and not what a system administrator would need. For example, in a remote access tool, a classic administration remote access tool, like remote desktop, for example, or remote assistance in Windows, that tool gives access to the screen and the mouse of the user that the administrator wants to help, or the server on which the administrator wants to work. In normal in Cobalt strike you don't have that feature, because a red teamer doesn't want to take over its target, a compromised server, for example. A red teamer doesn't want to take over the target by doing this via the screen, and a red teamer wants a cover channel and console access, and be able to perform tasks that a typical administrator would not do or would not be doesn't have the features for in his tool set. So, for example, dumping credentials, and that is something that Cobalt Strike can do. I'm pointing out also here the person that you see here, the figure on the Cobalt Strike website, because that is the typical iconography that is used in Cobalt Strike. You will see it coming back a couple of times. Like I said, what I'm talking about here is from a blue team perspective. I don't consider myself as a red teamer. I'm a blue teamer. I often help our red team, and sometimes I even do assessments for the red team, for example, like malware assessments. But I don't consider myself as a red teamer, and as such also, I'm not a user of Cobalt Strike. So I don't use Cobalt Strike myself. I've used it just a couple of times when I was working together with our red teamers. Then sometimes I got access, but in normal situations I look at Cobalt Strike from a blue team perspective. I want to point out two interesting documents that will give you a lot more information on Cobalt Strike, and that information is typically interesting for blue teamers. You have a Mandiant blog post here defining Cobalt Strike components so you can be confident in your analysis. So there are a lot of all the different terminology and components used in Cobalt Strike, explained for blue teamers. And then from the BlackBerry security team, you also have a book, an ebook, and it's called Finding Beacons in the Dark. In both cases, I've included the link. Cobalt Strike 4.4. So that is that's not the latest version. There was just last year, at the end of last year, a new version 4.5. But so this is typically what you will see when you start Cobalt Strike with the iconography that I show you at that figurine that comes back here. But what happens now also often in reality is that Cobalt Strike is used by criminals. It's not only by red teamers, it is used by criminals. And that is actually a good, very well illustrated by the fact that a couple of weeks ago, when I was looking for pictures to include in my presentation here, so I found this picture, which I included here, but this picture actually was found on a website that is called Repos Hub, and that is actually a pirated version of Cobalt Strike. So you have here Cobalt Strike 4.4, Cobalt Strike jar, the hash, and then on the next page instructions on how to use it. So the reason why Cobalt Strike is being used by criminals often nowadays is that criminals too need a remote access tool, and Cobalt Strike has become a very popular remote access tool for red teams. So it has the same functionality as criminals would need, and there are nowadays a lot of pirated version of Cobalt Strike going around. Like what I'm showing here, this one here, is just from a site from where you can download it. And not only do you have those pirated versions going around, but you even have instructions on how to use it. Like, for example, the Conti ransomware gang. This gang also uses Cobalt Strike, and they not only give versions of Cobalt Strike to their affiliates, they even have whole documentation on how to use Cobalt Strike. This is a screenshot of a translated manual from the Conti group for Cobalt Strike. It's in Russian, but this was here translated by someone into English, and as you can see, they're already starting with different commands that you would start to type in Cobalt Strike when you have achieved access to a target and you want to compromise it. Now, let's go into the terminology and how Cobalt Strike works. Cobalt Strike, the software, is running on a server, and this server is called the team server. An operator, so a red teamer or a criminal, connects to the Cobalt Strike server with a graphical user interface application. So there is an application in Cobalt Strike that can connect to the team server. And then you can configure the team server and also interact with targets. The first step that the red teamer or cyber criminal has to do is to generate a beacon. A beacon, that is the agent that will be deployed on the target. Cobalt Strike is for Windows, so one of the things you can generate with a team server is a beacon.exe file, so an executable, a PE file. And then, once the operator has generated the beacon, he has to make sure that it is deployed on the target. That is not something where Cobalt Strike itself will help the operator with. So the operator has, for example, to put that beacon into a malicious document and create a malicious document and then send that out to potential targets and hope that the targets will open the documents and let the macros run so that the Cobalt Strike beacon will execute. If we talk in terminologies of C2, say command and control server, then the team server, that is the C2 server, so the command and control server. And the beacon, that is the bot. When we talk about botnets, a C2 server, and a bot here, Cobalt Strike, we talk about team server and beacon. And then we talk administration. It's a different technology, but actually from a high level perspective, it's the same. A team server, that is the management server, and a beacon, that is the agent. Now, once the beacon is functional, is running on the target, there will be communication between the beacon and the team server. There will be C2 traffic. And then the operator can type commands that will be executed by the beacon on the target, and the result of those commands will be sent back to the operator. So the operator types the instructions on the team server and sees the results on the team server via its connection via the graphical console, but the communication takes place here between the agent, so the beacon, and the team server. And that communication can take many forms, HTTPS, HTTP, DNS. You can also develop your own protocol. You can transform the way it looks. For example, you could hide the communication in GIF files, for example. That is all possible with Cobalt Strike because it is very flexible in the way you configure it. Just for your information, I'm not going to talk more about this, but they call this malleable profiles. So profiles you can configure completely like you want it and have the traffic look like you want it. All the communication that is performed by the beacon and the server is encrypted. And I have this illustrated here. So you have the beacon here and you have the server here. The server has an RSA private key and the beacon has an RSA public key. Now, when I say the server has the private key, when a server has a private key, the server also has the public key. But I didn't put that here on the slide because it's not important here. What is important is that the beacon has a public key and the server has a private key. So the beacon can send data to the server that is encrypted, and only the server will be able to read this because the data is encrypted with the public key and it can only be decrypted with the private key. That is the nature of public key cryptography. So what the first thing will be is that the beacon sends metadata to the server. And that metadata is encrypted with RSA, with that public key. Here I have illustrated this with a typical HTTP channel. So the metadata is sent into an HTTP GET request. The operator can choose where this metadata is residing in the GET request, but in a typical default configuration, the metadata will be in a cookie header. So inside the cookie header of a GET request will be the encrypted metadata. The server receives that because the server is listening for HTTP requests from beacons, and it then extracts the encrypted metadata and decrypts it. And the metadata is very important for further communication, because the actual communication does not take place with public cryptography, but with secret cryptography, with AES. Now, if you are familiar with AES and secret cryptography, you need a secret key. That secret key is a random key that is generated by the beacon. So each time a beacon is executed, it generates a random key, 16 bytes. And those random bytes, that key, is put into the metadata. So one of the elements of the metadata is the secret key to be used for AES communication, AES encryption. Other pieces of metadata are, for example, the name of the Windows machine, the internal IP address of the Windows machine, the username under which the beacon is running, and different elements like that. So that all makes the metadata decrypted by the server, and then the server has the AES key, and then it can communicate here with AES. So red here, communication in red, that is RSA, in orange, that is AES. If, let's go back here, so the operator can type commands to the team server that will then be transmitted to the beacon. If the operator types commands, then those commands will be put into a queue by the server, and each time that the beacon does a GET request, the server will reply, so the reply to the GET request will be encrypted commands. So the commands encrypted with that AES key. The beacon can then decrypt those commands, interpret them, execute them, and if there is data to be sent back to the server, then that data will also be AES encrypted with that same key, and it will be posted to the server. So default configuration is a post request to the server. Now, one of the things that we have discovered at NVISO, something quite interesting for us blue teamers, is that private key here I talked about. That private key is unique for each instance of a Cobalt Strike team server. So if you deploy the Cobalt Strike team software on a server and you run it, then it will generate a private key that is unique. Well, a private and a public key that is unique for that instance. What we have discovered is that there are several pirated versions of Cobalt Strike that are going around, so zip files or RAR files that contain the Cobalt Strike team server, that also contain a generated private public key pair. So that is a Cobalt Strike instance that was cracked and executed, and therefore it generated the key. And the criminals who distribute that pirated version didn't know about that key, or else they forget to remove that key, but the fact is they are distributing also the key. The result of that is that there are criminals using those pirated versions, and they are using a key that is present in pirated versions, so that not only they are using, and there are other criminals using that same key. And we found on VirusTotal 6 keys. So we were able to read, well, that 6 keys in the beginning, and now I also recently found 3 new keys. So in total we already have 9 keys. So 9 private keys that we have recovered, and some of them are with pirated packages that are quite popular. At a certain time I made a statistic, and of all the rogue pirated Cobalt Strike servers that I could see during a span of several weeks, about 20 to 25% were using one of those pirated keys. Now, since we have now those pirated keys, it means we can actually decrypt that traffic. So if we can capture that traffic, we can also decrypt it, because with the private key, we can recover the AES key, and then we can do the decryption and see what commands were being sent and what results were being sent back. This is from our blog, blog.nviso.eu, and you will have several blog posts of us covering Cobalt Strike and traffic decryption. Now, let me talk a little bit about beacon analysis. So, I wrote a tool that helps me with beacon analysis. It's a Python tool, 1768. The name comes from the following. If you go to Wikipedia and you look up the article of the metal cobalt, well, the metal cobalt melts, the melting point of the cobalt metal is 1768 degrees Kelvin. So that's why I called my tool 1768.py. A beacon, that is the agent, and the beacon has to know what the team server is. So it needs to know the public key, it needs to know the IP address or the domain name of the team server, the port to which to connect, if it should connect with HTTP or HTTPS or DNS. All of those elements that the criminal configures in malleable profiles are also found in a Cobalt Strike beacon. They are encoded as a table of values into a Cobalt Strike beacon. And if you open a Cobalt Strike beacon that is not obfuscated, and you look for this sequence here, this is actually the encoded sequence for the configuration, the start of the configuration. It has been XOR encoded with value 2E, a single key 2E. And if you decode this, that's what you see in the next slide, you can here see some readable strings, like here, wallet to darkside.org search. So that is the configuration, the binary configuration that is encoded, and my tool 1768.py is able to interpret that configuration. So for example, the wallet.thedarkside.org search that we saw, that is a server to which to connect to, and that is the get URI that has to be done. So if the Cobalt Strike beacon does a get command, then it will use that URI. Another thing that you see here is the public key. So that large blob here, binary blob, that is actually the public key which my tool here has decoded. And you have more information. Not going to tell you too much about the details here. So that is something as an analyst, as an incident responder that we have to do often. We are called for incidents, ransomware incidents, and often we will see Cobalt Strike. So we will see, for example, a Cobalt Strike beacon, and we will find an executable. And we quickly need to know where it is connecting to and what it is doing. And what it is capable of. And that's something we can quickly do with that tool, and we extract the configuration. If an incident is ongoing, we can also ask if the administrators of the company that has been compromised has been able to capture traffic, or maybe even ask them to start capturing traffic. And if they start capturing network traffic, then I have also developed several tools that will help us to decrypt and analyze that traffic. You can find those tools referenced in our blog posts on our Nviso blog. I also wrote about those tools on the Internet Storm Center and my own blog. They are tools that allow you to look at traffic, decode traffic, decrypt traffic. And all of those tools have the following names: CS, and .pi. So CS stands for Cobalt Strike, and for example, you will have a tool that will help you do decryption and analysis of traffic, and that one is called CS traffic analysis. Here, for example, that is an interesting blog post on the Internet Storm Center that will give you more information on how the traffic is constituted, what are the elements of the traffic, because that one is a special one. This is a real malicious traffic that doesn't use encryption, so it's in clear text. That's because they are using a trial version of Cobalt Strike. And if you use a trial version of Cobalt Strike, it is fully functional, but it doesn't use encryption. So that one is a bit easier to understand what's going on, and that's what you can find in that blog post. So before we go into Q&A, to summarize, you have Cobalt Strike that is often used by cyber criminals nowadays, and as blue teamers we often have to deal with that. And that is why we do research and why we develop tools to help us with that, to quickly be able to analyze what a beacon does, and also developing tools that can help us to take a look at encrypted traffic and try to figure out what has happened. So we can now go into Q&A if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Didier. Excellent presentation. I do have a couple of questions from some people. I see one question from Ergo Proxy, who asks, in your research, have you observed custom team server deployments with redirectors and or proxies that try to hide the team server from blue teams and threat hunters? He also follows up with a statement, I think that such configuration parameters could be seen in the metadata of the agent with a secret header value, that when handled by the proxy could be used to authorize beacon requests to the actual team server.
Yeah, indeed, that is something that we see, and not only that they completely hide the team server, that you just have one port, the port of the listener, that is open. So even the administrative port, which is typically on port 50,050, that one too is not accessible to the internet. And I also know from our red team that nowadays they also like to do Cobalt Strike over DNS, doing this over DNS traffic, and then you actually have not a single TCP port that is open.
Thank you so much, Didier. He also follows up with another question. Have you seen public cloud services being used to facilitate such configurations like Azure or Google Cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is very frequent. Yeah. So how do I see those servers? So I wrote a very small blog post about that. There are a couple of threat intel feeds that will give you on a daily basis or weekly basis information, well, IP addresses of new Cobalt Strike servers that they have discovered. Yeah? And so every day my scripts, those make a list of all the new IP addresses that have been seen, and typically it's just a couple, 4 to 5 every day. And then I will connect to those servers, try to download a beacon, and then extract the complete configuration of that beacon. And I typically also get errors when I connect, for example, that I get headers back from an Nginx server that says me that I don't have, that I'm not allowed to access it, for example.
Thank you, Didier. We have a couple more questions. I have another question from a user, November. How reliable can the JARM signature of a team server be in terms of detection? Does it change with each version of Cobalt Strike, or is it specific to the Java server component?
And which signature would that be? I didn't catch that.
It says JARM.
Ah, okay. Yes.
Sorry.
I don't use that signature that much. What I find more reliable is the public key that they use, and also something that is known as the license ID or the watermark. Some people also call that the watermark. So that when you have a legitimate Cobalt Strike server, then that public key and that license ID will always be unique for that instance. Okay? If you have pirated versions, then the license ID will often be reused, will appear, will not be unique, I mean, and depending if they are using pre-generated keys or not, that key to here, that public key to might be unique or not. And my tool, let me actually go here in demo, where I run my tool here on a sample, a beacon. So what you see here is that my tool says that the license ID of that version of that beacon is 0. And that is typical for a trial version or a pirated version. And I've made statistics, and as we can see here, I have seen 500 public keys. I have seen 500 unique IPs or host names that use that license ID, and 500 public keys. No, sorry, 295 public keys that are also associated with that license ID. So now let me see if I have another example here. Yes, indeed. So, that is also a good one. So this sample is something you can download. I wrote a blog post about it on Enviso. At Enviso, we also do capture the flags for students. And about a good month ago, there was such a capture the flag event at our German offices, the cyber security rumble, they called it. And one of the challenges involved Cobalt Strike with DNS communication. So you can download that sample, and what you get is a memory dump and traffic capture. And you had to decrypt the traffic to find the key and capture the flag. So the flag, actually not the key, but the flag. Why am I talking about this? Well, with my tool, you can also extract the configuration from the process memory dump. And that's what you see here. And now, if you look at the license ID, it is this number. So that number, I don't have any statistics about it. I have never seen it before. And the same here for that public key. That is because that was generated by someone at Enviso. It was a sample that was generated by Enviso. So that license ID is specific for Enviso and for that instance of the Cobalt Strike server that we use to generate that key. That is something, that one here we only use for testing purposes, but that is a key that allows you to uniquely identify it. Now you don't know to which this belongs because the keys, they are, those license IDs, so the watermarks, they are distributed by the seller of Cobalt Strike. So nowadays that is Help Systems, the company that sells Cobalt Strike. When you buy a license with them, they will give you unique license IDs. But like I said, criminals use pirated versions, and those pirated versions, they reuse license ID. So if you see a license ID that has been used several times, yeah, then you can be sure that it's a pirated version and that you're dealing with a criminal. Okay? Any more questions?
Sorry, I had myself on mute. There's a couple more questions. Another question from Ergo Proxy. What do you do when you first discover Cobalt Strike on a client? What's the first thing you do?
Well, typically we are already into the acquisition process when we discover Cobalt Strike. So it's not that we will look at a server, I mean log into a server and discover Cobalt Strike. The thing that will happen is when we do incident response, we take a disk image, we take a memory dump of the machine, and then we look at the processes that are running. And it's at that moment that we will discover the Cobalt Strike beacon. So for example, by seeing an executable, an unexpected executable, you see an executable that you don't expect, and then you can run my tool on it, and if my tool recognizes it, it will extract the configuration, and then you know that it is a Cobalt Strike beacon. Another thing is, for example, when we run specific Yara rules on the executables that we have found on the machine. Or we can also, with the memory dump that we took of the machine, we can also use that memory dump to look for evidence of Cobalt Strike. So it's not that we discover Cobalt Strike when we are on the machine and then say, okay, we will take a memory dump or we will do a disk image. Once we have discovered it, it's actually the other way around. We know that there is something going on that machine. We don't actually know what, so we already start the incident response process at that time, and we do evidence collection. So like a full memory dump or and disk imaging. Now it is important to not turn off the machine or not kill any processes, because Cobalt Strike is actually fileless. So by that I mean, okay, you can have a malicious document, but once the Cobalt Strike is into the machine, that malicious document is no longer needed, and Cobalt Strike can migrate from one process to the other, and that's completely fileless. And so you certainly need to capture the memory if you want to collect evidences for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Didier. There's more questions coming.
Okay.
Another user, Exodia. You mentioned the configuration is XOR encoded on the beacon, and it is possible to interpret it. What key is used for the XOR? Is it known?
Yeah. It's a very simple key. So let me go back to the slides.
It also looks like it was answered by user November too. So
it is. If it depends on the version of Cobalt Strike, but if it is version 2, it is 2E, as you can see here. So 2E, that's a dot. And if it is version 3, it is the lowercase letter I. So 6F if I'm not mistaken. And actually my tool will tell you that. So if you go to the output beginning here, it will say you config found XOR key. Here you see it's a dot. And if we go to the other one, this one here, that should be a version 3, so 1768 TI. So that is a single key, but that is when a beacon has no particular obfuscation. A beacon can have extra obfuscation, and that's what you see here in those numbers, like int XOR key. It can, for example, be extra XOR obfuscation with a 32-bit key. But in this sample, it's not the case. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Didier. So we have another question also from Ergo Proxy. Seems to be more of an incident response type of question too. How do you put it into business terms that persistence is set up and an enterprise is actively compromised? How do you communicate the risk?
Well, I actually have, from that point of view, I actually have a quite easy job. I rarely talk directly to the customer or administrators of the customers. It's more my colleagues who do that. So I'm not able to answer that question with the correct answer. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe from the perspective of the SOC, there's a couple of things that we do there. We typically get on the phone with the customer. That's actually a lot about what Maxime Thibault does. He's also in the chat as well. We actually did have an instance where Cobalt Strike was seen on a high-profile asset at a customer, and we get on the phone with them, and we have to explain, what Cobalt Strike is in the best way that we can, and what the risk is to them. And beyond that, we get really aggressive, telling them that it's time to get incident response involved. So that's basic. You basically have to handle that differently in each instance.
Yeah. What I can tell you is that on my end, when I do the analysis, I also have to assess each time if we are dealing with criminals or with the red team activity, because we have had several times incidents where a Cobalt Strike beacon was used, but it was actually a red team that was doing the activity. So in that case, so I need to be able to determine that, and then I communicate that to our POC, our SPOC, so the single point of contact with the client. And what our SPOC then tells to the client actually is quite different when we think it is a red team exercise. Because you can have red team exercises where the blue team is aware that the red team exercise is going on, but you can also have red team exercises where the blue team is not aware. And so you have to tell them then that with rather high confidence that we think that we are dealing with the red team exercise, and that we advise them to get in touch with the red team, if there is a red team, or else another part of their company. For example, I know cases where the auditing team requested an external red team assessment. Well, to get in touch with them to figure out if a red team exercise is going on, because if that is the case, you don't want to spend the same amount of time and money on an incident with the red team as with an incident with criminals.
Thank you, Didier. And there's a couple more questions from the Argo proxy as well. I think I can answer this next one. It says, if you observe P2 data exfiltration, is the possibility of completely turning off the machine an option? Now, I guess it comes from, and Didier, if you have also your perspective on this as well, but from our perspective, it's, since we're an MSSP, we work primarily with customers, so we do machine isolations. A lot of the times, if it's a workstation, we won't even talk to the customer. We'll just isolate the machine if we see any type of activity on that machine that we don't like. And of course, if it's a asset which is business critical, we do have to communicate that to the customer, and they have to take the call on it. And in some cases, and there is an interesting case at SecureWorks that I heard about recently, where a web server that I think it generated $1 million every 3 hours, and SecureWorks went ahead and isolated that machine, and that customer lost millions of dollars. You also have to weigh the risk of
indeed.
The business impact.
Now, with the default Cobalt Strike beacon, and also with your typical criminal, Cobalt Strike does not offer any persistent mechanisms. So it's up to the criminal to use and find out which persistent mechanism they will use. So typically, there's not much of a persistent mechanism. If you find the process with the beacon and you suspend it, you don't even have to kill it, just suspend it, you have stopped Cobalt Strike.
Also a good point. He's also asking, would it be possible to get access on the source code of the tool that you created? Is there a way to contribute to this tool?
Most of my tools are public, and you can just find it on my GitHub, on my blog. So GitHub, that's just Didier Stevens. My blog is blog.didierstevens.com. Yeah, no problem.
And also, since you guys are all here, if you want to keep up with Didier Stevens, we have an expert feeds channel. So anytime he posts something on Twitter, he posts a lot of his updates on his tools on Twitter. So you can actually see that, and you can kind of follow the trail back to his GitHub and his other tools.
Okay.
So we have another question coming from user Decipher. Why do we see a lot of Cobalt strike since the beacon has to be dropped on the disk? Couldn't that be blocked from the beginning with advanced monitoring, especially the beacons that have the same signature from pirated products?
The beacon itself doesn't actually have to be dropped on the disk. For example, it can be just in VBA code of a malicious document. And the VBA code can then just take the beacon, so the binary data of the beacon, and inject that as shellcode into the word process itself. And from there it can activate and spread to other processes. So it's actually the malicious document that in that case you need to detect the malicious document on disk. And that depends on the antivirus that you are using. You have antiviruses that are very good at detecting malicious documents, and you have antiviruses that are less good at detecting malicious documents. But anyways, even if you have an antivirus that is very good at detecting malicious documents, if you have a good red team or a dedicated, determined criminal, they will know which antivirus that you are using, and they will try to and succeed to generate a file, a malicious document that is not detected by your antivirus. Actually, the Cobalt strike beacons themselves nowadays are very well detected. So the beacons that are generated by Cobalt strike themselves without any transformation afterwards, those are very well detected by antiviruses.
All right, thank you, Didier. Yeah, a lot of what red teamers are doing these days and cyber criminals doing these days is really putting their effort into defense evasion anyways. So a lot of those products, if the adversary is advanced enough, they could be almost useless. They make it more difficult, but yeah. An interesting question also from Ergo Proxy, maybe above my pay grade to answer that one too. With HTTP 3 and Quick getting traction, and with .NET 6 support of Quick and HTTP 3 and Windows 11, do you think that we will see custom-made C2 frameworks of a more sophisticated nature?
Yes. You have red teams that do all kinds of research into this, and they will certainly develop these kinds of things. And then you have also really advanced ATPs, not your average ATP, but really ATPs that do their own research. They will also develop tools like this. Now the difference will be that at a certain time, the red team who develops this will open source this, and that will become public. And then you will see an adoption by other red teams, and then later on also by criminals. But they will only start to do that if it really benefits them. So if they really gain from that, doing that, from being able to compromise more targets than they can do nowadays. If they can compromise servers and targets as they wish with the technology that they have nowadays for the moment, then they will not evolve. The evolving comes from teams and organizations who want to spend the time and money on doing the research, like advanced red teams and advanced ATPs. It's a bit of a strange term to say an advanced ATP, but not all ATPs do that kind of research.
Thank you, Didier. So actually, I'm going to move on to more career-oriented questions that are coming in.
Okay.
So Explo is asking, how do you spend a day at work? What do you mostly do research? Are you doing live monitoring? How regularly do you deal with red teams versus criminals?
So I don't do live monitoring anymore. I've done that for a client for a couple of years, but I don't do any live monitoring nowadays. If I'm working on an incident, is very simple. It actually depends if there are incidents or not, and that can vary very much. We can have periods when, for several weeks, there are actually no incidents or no significant incidents, and then we can have periods with so much incidents that we have to even do overtime. So that varies much. And then, what remains then goes to doing research, but also doing a lot of documentation. With all of the tools that I make, I also try to do good documentation. So if you take, for example, my tool 17680 pi, and you do H, then you get the help. So that's just a list of the options. Yeah, that's classic. But what I also do is a manual, so a man page that is included into the tool itself. So that's with option M. It comes with many of my tools. And so first you get the help, but then you get a complete explanation of the tool and all of its features, what they do. So I make documentation like that also internally for us, for Enviso, with guidelines and procedures. That's also an important thing, because it's very useful in a team that as much team members as possible can perform all of the actions that are required, like all the types of analysis. And that is why the things that I learn and the methods that I use, I try to put them into tools and into documentation, public documentation, so that other people can benefit from it and reproduce it. And then, of course, what then I will also do, if time permits, is doing research. But it varies. When you're doing incident response, you cannot predict when you will have time to do something.
Thank you, Didier. I want to ask you a question. It's for, I think, for the community too, because there's also a lot of young people in the channel. If they wanted to, become a cybersecurity researcher like you are, and have the skill sets, or aspire to be like you, where does one start? Do you have any recommendations off the top of your head?
Yeah. You have several places to start, but what I recommend to not only security people, also just IT people who are not into security, a very, very useful skill to have is to be able to script or programming. Okay? So if you are able to program, then you can have different procedures and methodologies that you work out, and then you can start to program them. And that means that you are sharing your skills through your program. Now, the fact that you are able to script or program will also allow you to automate the things that you do, and gain a lot of time and money, and then by automating things. For example, the very first time, I think it was in 2015, the very first time I encountered the Cobalt strike beacon, I didn't know that I was dealing with the Cobalt strike beacon. Of course, I had an executable, and I disassembled that with IDA Pro, and there was no decompiler back then, if I remember correctly. But anyway, so I did the disassembly, and several layers of obfuscation, and I think it took me about 6 to 7 hours, so almost a complete workday, to figure out that I was dealing with a Cobalt strike beacon. That same beacon nowadays, with all that I know and that I've translated into tools and documentation, I can just do the analysis with a snap of a finger with my tool. So by being able to do that, you free up more time to do more research or more incident response. You have some blue teamers that are complaining about the fact that Cobalt Strike nowadays is being so easy to use by criminals. I'm not from that point of view. For me, it's actually a plus that criminals use Cobalt Strike, because Cobalt Strike nowadays is a known tool. We know a lot about Cobalt Strike. So when criminals use it, we already know how to deal with that. We are not dealing with a completely new framework that we have to completely reverse engineer and try to understand. Now, so I'm ranting on about scripting and programming. So that is one thing, and that is, more in my nature. That is something that I like to do. What it is, I think the most important thing to do actually is to select something that you like to do, because it will be easier to continue doing this for many years and decades. Last year I started my 30 year in my career, so I've been working for 30 years now, and I can only imagine that I was able to work for 30 years long into IT and IT security because I enjoy it and I like it. So I think that the most important thing here is to find something that you enjoy doing, and that you focus on that, because that will help you in the long term. In my case, it is programming, but another thing that it can be very useful is do documentation, or proof of concepts, or blog posts with training, and that you explain things. Nowadays you often see blog posts that do explain how to analyze a particular sample of a malicious document or a malicious file, and they use my tools. So they are documenting how to use my tools, and that is something also very useful for the community. So another thing that you could focus on, if you don't like programming, or if you think programming that's too hard to start for me, then just start documenting. For example, start a blog, or start a TikTok channel. For example, I have a YouTube channel. I don't have a TikTok channel. You can also invent new formats to communicate, to start to communicate, and just start with simple things. And while your skills grow, you can improve them. If coming back to programming, if programming is too difficult if the learning curve is too hard, then instead of starting programming from scratch, try to make modifications to existing tools, to existing open source tools. Look how they work. See if you want to make some improvement or some change, and try to do that first. So that's well, depending on the complexity of that tool, that can be an easier step to get started. Okay. So, but just to summarize again, you can do programming, you can documentation, you can write training, but I think the most important thing is that you do something that you like, because you will have to do that for many years, and it's just easier to do something for many years when you like it than when you dislike it.
Thank you so much, Didier. I think we are at the 1 hour point. First of all, thank you so much for coming to speak to us in the community channel.
Yeah, you're welcome. No problem.
And thank you to everybody who showed up today as well. I'm glad that there's a lot of people, young people as well in Greece, who are interested in this topic. And you know that we're here to help you guys and to help you break into the career if you have not, or to help you, advance your career as much as possible. This community is for you guys. It's for helping to improve you guys. If you need anything whatsoever, if you have suggestions, please feel free to contact me. I'm never bothered by that. So with that being said, thank you, Didier. If you have any closing remarks.
No, I just want to say that you can certainly also get in touch with me. So that's my Inviso email address, that's my Twitter, and my Gmail, that's just didier.stevens@gmail.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. I'll be in the general channel for a little bit to chat later on. Thank you, Didier, and I will be closing the event.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Have a nice
Bye.
afternoon. Bye-bye.